Did I give you that little blessing booklet though? Do you
Yes,
have it?
I have it.
All right, let's start from the beginning. We're beginning, just, I guess anyone listening to this, if you're enrolled in this class or coming to these classes as part of a conversion process, you also need to meet with me every 3 to 6 weeks so we can discuss a program and figure out a pathway forward. There's a reading list as well in addition to this class, but hopefully the class is valuable, whether you watch online, whether you're here in person, in any way. Our first unit is called The History of the Torah and Halacha. How did we get to the way in which we observe Judaism? Where did it come from, and how did it develop? What's the story? And our source for the story, the first source, is the sections of the Torah that we're reading right now in Shul, in the book of Genesis. We read in Genesis that God created the entire world, that God created the first human beings, that every human being comes from the same common ancestor. Every human being is fashioned by God in God's own image. And the first chapters of Genesis tell a story of human failure and God's disappointment in human behavior. So the first people sin, they eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they're expelled from Eden. And we'll read this week in Shul, we'll hear this week in Shul about the generation of the flood. Everything got really bad. God wipes out the earth in a flood. And then after the flood, God says, go and spread out and I'll bless you. And what do? They gather together again in the city. They build a tower, the story of Migdal Babel, the Tower of Babel. And God scatters everyone. And from this point on, the Torah shifts its focus from being the story of God's relationship with the world, God's creation of the universe, the heavens and earth, and the relationship with all humanity, every human being, and to becoming the story of one family. It seems that even though God continues to care about every human being, God has a plan for the whole world. God decided to work towards that plan through having a relationship with just one family, and ultimately which will become one nation. And that's the story of Abraham and Sarah. And so obviously the Torah focuses on a very, very narrow point. So it seems to be that, maybe the idea is maybe there's one family that can educate their children in a right way of living and a right way of behaving. And that can grow into something larger than a family, into a nation that can have a relationship with God. That can be some way for God to shape the world, influence the world, and ultimately carry out God's plan for all human beings. Okay? So the Torah is the story of God's relationship with the Jewish people, even though God cares about every human being. So I don't really know what the the story of the Canadian relationship with God, like that's not what the Torah is about. The story of the Chinese relationship with God, that's not what the Torah is about. I don't know about that. Like if you want to learn about that, ask a Canadian, ask a Chinese person to tell you about their relationship with God, because that's not the story of the Torah. The Torah is about our Jewish relationship with God. Doesn't mean that other people don't have a relationship with God. Doesn't mean God doesn't care about it. God cares about everyone. But we have the Torah which tells us what God wants from us. And ultimately we believe that that in our doing what God wants us to do, somehow that's going to be good for everyone as well. Okay? So maybe one phrase that you find in some of the prophets, they speak about the Jews being a light to the nations. That means we do what God wants us to do and other people learn from our example. The Torah speaks about a nation of priests. Okay, the priest is an intermediate priest, serves God on behalf of the people, represents the people on behalf to God, represents God to the people. And that's the role of the Jewish people, to have vis-a-vis humanity. We're bearers of God's message to all human beings. That's a message of ethical monotheism, treating others with justice and fairness and kindness and mercy, worshiping one God. That's the core message for all human beings. We have that. And ultimately we're supposed to, living our lives as good Jews helps other people be better at whatever they're supposed to be, okay? Not that everyone is supposed to be Jewish, but we're supposed to be Jewish, and to do it in the right way, in a way that sort of reflects positively towards everyone else. So the Torah tells us a lot, once that focus takes place, right? Towards the beginning of the book of Genesis, the Torah focuses very, very on this one family and how they struggle to have children and to raise their children, to teach their children, to pass on traditions to their children, and how it doesn't always work out, and there are some failures along the way. But ultimately, at the end of Genesis, there is a family that 70 people strong goes down to Egypt with enough cohesion, enough identity they can maintain that identity even in Egypt, and that's the family that becomes the Jewish people. The Torah tells us that they had certain practices that helped, or family traditions that they practiced, like they only ate certain kinds of foods. There were certain other elements of their value system that the Torah tells us a little bit about, but we don't have mitzvot, have a commanded, we're bound to God as a Jewish people through commandments until after the Exodus. Okay, we have actually got some mitzvot before, we get some mitzvot right as we're leaving. The first mitzvah given to the Jewish people is to establish a calendar. We have spoken about that earlier in Exodus chapter 12, and then we're brought to Mount Sinai and we're given the Torah. And that's, I don't know, in some ways that's like the most important event in the history of the universe, because that's how God is giving God's will to humanity. By giving us the Torah, we're meant to live out the Torah, to observe all of its mitzvot, and again, in that way, bring blessing to all human beings. That's right. Our relationship with God is defined by the Torah. That's what creates it and what defines it.
So when were the commandments defined?
Very good question. Because the Torah's commandments are a little bit ambiguous. Yeah. Torah says don't boil a kidneys by their milk. How does that get to you worrying about your taco spoon and your sour cream, right? Boiling spoons in water, where's that coming from? Okay. So that's the story of this rest of Unit 1, okay? Because God, the Torah that God gave us, it's called a written Torah because it was subsequently written down. Have you ever seen a Torah scroll up close?
Not up close, no.
Let's take a look.
I missed the part where you said I lifted the scroll Saturday because it was like so heavy on one end.
Yes, it was. Here, come. Let me just move the camera out of the way. Here, let's take a look. This is a little smaller than the one Nitai lifted. So.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Do you read Hebrew yet?
Do I? No. Not quite.
Have you taken classes yet or started?
No, I haven't been there yet. Learning process.
That's fine. So maybe you'll notice what's so special here. So you see, this is how the Torah, this is like the basic, how the Torah is. Have you seen the Torah before? I don't know if you've been closely.
Yeah.
Okay, it's written on parchments, okay? It's from the animal skin, written by hand with a quill. You notice what isn't here?
No punctuation.
No punctuation, okay? Okay. So to show you, just compare to how you might study, when you're following along. So the lines and dots, alright? These two dots here, that's a period, okay? This little symbol here, these are punctuation marks. This is how all the these dots and lines, these are the vowels, okay? Hebrew letters, right, are not written the vowels. The vowels are sort of added later, so later historical development to write the vowels. So it's very hard to figure out even what their words mean without, often, there's words, two very different words could be different only in how they're pronounced. And the way that they're pronounced is not written in the Torah itself. That's this tradition.
Why is there no punctuation?
So like there's a... So take another look, right? Sorry. Okay. So this means that the people who are reading the Torah in shul, they're studying how the Torah sounds, and then they're applying that when they read it. So they have to study very carefully. Here's what this looks like. This is what it sounds like when it's read, because I know that because I have all the vowels here and all the punctuation and the cantillation marks that tell me how to chant it, and then I accurately reconstruct that when I read from the scroll, which doesn't have any of that written in, just the letters. So the core of the written Torah that we got at Sinai is just the letters and the spaces between them. Even something as basic as how they're pronounced, the gap, where the gaps between the verses are, how the words are pronounced, that's like an extra level of, that's an oral tradition. And nobody invented a way to write it down for thousands of years. It was in the Middle Ages, and in Tiberias, said like, it'd be really helpful if we had a way to write all this stuff down. And they invented the vowels, and they invented the cantillation marks, and that's how it worked. But for thousands of years, it was just oral tradition. This is what it sounds like when these words are read, and so we just learned that. That tradition was very intact. It was passed on from student to teacher for generations and generations. So the written Torah is just the letters and the spaces between them. The oral tradition that was not written down was, among other things, how these words are pronounced, how they're chanted, where the gaps, spaces are. There are paragraph breaks, but there are no verse breaks. Okay? I'm going to lift it. You should stay standing. When the Torah is in motion, we should, is not at rest, we should stand as well. It's a sign of respect, so I'm going to put it away now. This has to be rolled to get to the right spot.
It's bigger than I thought.
This is actually a small one. This is actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Heck, that one's really big in there.
Yeah, so Torahs are actually smaller than they used to be because they like them. It's considered to be more convenient to have them a little lighter, and they're made with a thinner form of parchment. It is made actually from fetal calves, which are a byproduct of the biomedical industry. So you can get the hides of fetal calves very, very cheap, and it's very strong and very light, and it's used.
I actually want something durable, I'm sure.
That's true, yeah. Okay, let's go back. So, not only do we need tradition for this basic information, this is what the letters are supposed to sound like, this is what the words sound like when they're read, we also need oral tradition for what do these words mean, okay? How am I supposed to apply them? Because if we're supposed to do the mitzvah together, and the Torah is subject to interpretation, there's a need for some way to figure out collectively what this means. And so we also have an oral tradition about that as well. And so you could have different understandings of what that oral Torah, that oral tradition is. One understanding is that God gave us the written Torah as something that was meant to be written down. And then God also told us, and here's what it means. And that's the oral Torah. It could be that the oral Torah was a little bit more limited, and maybe what God said was more limited, like, and I want you to interpret this and figure out what it means. And maybe that oral Torah was more of like a charge that we were supposed to study and figure out what the Torah means. Because the classic rabbinic literature, much of it is trying to figure out what the Torah means, which suggests they didn't know already because they're trying to figure it out. Or maybe they knew and they were just trying to figure out like the connection between the law and the Torah. In other words, they knew the Torah says this, and they knew the law was this, and so what they were doing in the classic rabbinic period was finding the connections between the written Torah and the laws that they practiced, and that they knew and that were received based on tradition going back from all the way to Sinai. Or maybe we were at Sinai, we were given the Torah, and then we were told, I want you to, use principles of hermeneutics, try to figure out, what the Torah means, and then there were like centuries of arguments about that, and eventually a tradition developed, okay? So you can find all this if you look at letter C, Midrash Halacha, Midrash Agadah. There are Midrashim, there are collections of this rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. Midrash is the word for interpretation of the Torah. There are two kinds of Midrash, Midrash Halacha, Midrash Agadah. Midrash Halacha is these rabbinic effort to figure out what the legal portions of the Torah mean. So for example, the Torah says, it's a holiday of Shavuot, you celebrate it 50 days mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbat. Does the day after Shabbat mean Sunday, or does the day after Shabbat mean the day after the first day of Passover? If we're going to know when to celebrate the holiday, we got to figure out what that word means. And we say the day after Shabbat means the day after the first day of Passover. Shavuot is always 50 days after the first day of Passover.
It falls on Shabbat, it's the day after.
So if the first day of Pesach is on Shabbat, can the first day of Pesach be on Shabbat? Yes. So then the first Shabbat will be 50 days later, it will also be on Shabbat.
So it can.
Yeah, Shabbat will be on Shabbat. I think so. Remember all the days, the holidays. Rosh Hashanah can't fall out on it. The first day of Rosh Hashanah is never on a Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. We talked about that, right?
Yeah.
So
That's why I asked.
then you can do the other calculations and see
Yeah.
how it. There's like a little mnemonic because there's the first day of Passover and it's the same day of the week as Tisha B'Av. The second day of Passover, same day of the week as Shavuot. The third day of Passover, same day of the week as Rosh Hashanah of the following year, I think. So it seems like that's like a. It's called an atbash pattern. The first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet, and the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet and the second to last letter of the alphabet, and the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet and the third to last, and that's so first, second, third, fourth. Like the days of Passover, days of the week of Passover correspond to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet at the end, which stand for like the holiday that they occur. So that's like a way you can remember it like the calendar. Okay. So that's an example of Midrash Halacha. Okay, that's figuring out how to observe the mitzvot in the Torah, the legal parts of the Torah, the normative parts of the Torah, figuring that out. The rabbis also tried to figure out what the stories in the Torah were about. Okay, so there are midrashim. Okay, like I don't know. Like the Torah says that Noah was a righteous man in his generation. He was perfect in his generation. A righteous man, comma, perfect in his generation. That sounds redundant. What is it? I'm just talking about Noah because we're going to read about this. Okay? What does it mean he was righteous in his generation? So that could mean maybe it is saying he lived amongst really rotten people. They're all scoundrels. And even in his generation, he managed to be righteous. That's pretty special. If he had lived in a generation with other good people, he could have been so much greater. Okay? Or it's saying, yeah, compared to his generation, he was righteous, because they were all scoundrels. But if he had lived amongst decent people, nobody would have thought that he was anything special. Okay? So these are two different, like, that's all based on, like, what does this word mean? Okay, trying to figure out. The Torah tells us a story about a man named Noah, and what he did, and what he was about, and that effort of the rabbis in the classical period to figure out what it means, that's called Midrash Agadah. So there are ancient collections of Midrashim, of these Midrashic works. There are halachic Midrash that, again, focus on the legal parts of the Torah, and there are Agadic, Midrash Agadah, about the stories of the Torah, all again trying to figure out what they mean. You actually find examples of both. The Passover Seder, the Haggadah, contains, if you read through it carefully, it contains Midrash Halacha, Yachal Midrash Chodesh. Could it be that the mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus is a mitzvah we can fulfill the entire month? No, you have to do it only on that day when you have Bavorzel, when you have Matzah and Maror there in front of you. These are nighttime mitzvot, so the obligation of the story is a nighttime mitzvah as well. Okay, that is that's Midrash Halacha. It's preserved in the Passover Haggadah, and it's an example of this exegesis, this like looking at these verses in the Torah, trying to figure out how to do mitzvah, what the law is. The Haggadah also contains Midrash Agadah. It's how do we know that every plague in Egypt was really 5 plagues after all? It says that, right? There's a story in the Torah, or also an Aramean tried to kill my father. How do we know? But it's a story in the Torah. It's a narrative. We're trying to figure out what it really means. Let's figure out more. Let's look at the significance of each twist in the word and the nuances and explore that and sort of blow up all those possibilities of what it could mean. That's Midrash Agadah. It's taking a story in the Torah, a narrative in the Torah, and trying to interpret it. So these are both very, very ancient genres of rabbinic literature. Okay. So at some point, so the written Torah was written, as we saw in the Torah scroll. Okay, we have very old Torah scrolls. We don't have very old Torah scrolls. We have very old parchments. The oldest parchments that we have that contain pieces of scripture are the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they're about 2,000 years old. So that's old. It's not, scheme of things. The history of the Jewish people is not that old, but it's still pretty old. Okay, compared to a book. Okay.
Yeah.
Generally, paper parchment doesn't last all that long, right?
Yeah.
So and the Dead Sea Scrolls were in a cave in the desert, so it was very, very dry. So there was no moisture, and it was in these pottery, jars in the desert, in a cave in the desert, like high, far away from floods and water and anything, animal, That's how it lasted so long. Generally, things made organic material doesn't last long. We found some stone engravings or verses from the Torah that we found even older that were carved on stone. So we have a few examples of that. What was that? Okay, the written Torah was written. The oral Torah was oral, meaning it was not written. Okay, it's just you learn how you would study from a teacher. You would memorize it. Just vast quantities of these rules and. Around the year 200, I realized, this little history of the Torah also be coincide with the history of the Jews in their land, out of the land, first temple, second temple, right? So let me tell the story, and then I'll go back and tell the story again with some, just with some dates and just some context, okay? Around the year 200, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who was the leading Torah scholar and leading political power amongst the Jews in the land of Israel, was concerned that the Torah would be forgotten, that this centuries-long effort to just reproduce and preserve the oral Torah without it being consigned to writing would fail. So even though there was a very strong sense that the oral Torah is supposed to be oral, the written Torah is supposed to be written, the oral Torah is supposed to be oral, he felt it was appropriate to consign it to writing. And he edited a work known as the Mishnah, which is the collection of the oral Torah, nicely organized and edited for preservation and study. Let me go back and do some timelines. Okay, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, tells the story of the exodus from Egypt, leaving Egypt, 40 years in the desert. Torah ends when we're about to cross back into the land of Israel. Okay, 1 second. We just did Roman numeral 1, letter A, B, C, and we're on D. No, actually D also. Okay. Do you have one of those before? Do you have one of those? Another one? It's like a 3. It's a. Here's the second page.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Torah ends. Jews are about to cross the Jordan River to go back into the land of Canaan. That's the end of the Torah. That's the end of the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Joshua picks up, right afterwards, and Joshua leads the people across the Jordan River, and they begin the conquest of the land of Israel. And the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, describes a period of, a few hundred years as they are trying to conquer Israel, and they're ruled by little tribal chieftains, okay? The book of Samuel tells the story of the tribes coming together and appointing a king. The first king is Saul, doesn't work out so well. Second king is David, works out a little bit better. Solomon, pretty decent king. After Solomon, his son Rehoboam is a bit of a foolish king. The kingdom splits into 2, okay? Kingdom of Israel up north with the 10 northern tribes, of Judah in the south, okay? Tribe of Judah in the south, 2 kingdoms. That endures until, we're talking, let's say King David, let's say it's around the year 1000 BCE. It's about 3,000 years ago. 722, Sennacherib from Syria comes in and conquers the northern kingdom. 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar from Babylonia comes in and conquers the southern kingdom, destroys the first temple, 586 BCE. So, in David's year 1000, 586 BCE is the destruction of the first temple. 70 years later, Babylonia in turn is conquered by the Persian Empire. Cyrus says, the Jews, go back to the land and rebuild your temple. Most of the Jews don't go back, they stay in Persia, Babylonia, and they stay there until the 20th century. Some of them maybe are still there. Okay? That's the Iraqi Jewish community and the Iranian Persian Jewish community. Okay, they never go back to Israel, they just stay there. That's the majority of Jews. A few come back to Israel, there are a few who were already there. The temple's rebuilt. That's the Persian period, and then Alexander the Great comes in and he conquers, and his kingdom is divided into three, and the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria. It's the Hanukkah story that's around the year 165 BCE. Okay. Maccabees rule for a little bit. Second generation is kind of rotten. They bring the Romans in. What's his face comes in? The famous guy. Friends, Romans, citizens, them your ears. Mark Antony, right? Okay? He comes in with Cleopatra, the whole thing, right? And land of Israel becomes a Roman province. First a kingdom under Roman protection, then a province. One of the kings of the city, Herod, is a big builder, also a rotten guy, but he builds a lot. He expands the second temple, makes it even nicer, much, much bigger than before. This is we have rabbinic material from this period. Okay, people Hillel and Shammai are living at the time of the second temple. Hillel and Shammai, right? Okay. In the year 70 of the Common Era, okay, the numbers are going up now. The temple is destroyed, second temple is destroyed in the context of a war against Rome. During that war against the Romans, Yochanan ben Zakkai, who's in Jerusalem, realizes that this fight against the Romans is a foolish fight. The zealots are in control of the city. They're actually burning food to make everyone fight harder. They're not allowing anyone to leave the city. Yochanan ben Zakkai pretends to be dead and has his students take him out of the city. Once he gets out of the city, he jumps out of the coffin, runs to the Roman general, who is Vespasian, and calls him, my king, my king. And Vespasian says, I'm not a king, I'm just the general. And no sooner had he said that, a message came from Rome and said, the Senate just voted, and said, you're the next emperor. So he says, this guy's pretty smart. So he says, I give you whatever you ask, you make a request, and I'll give it to you. And he says, give me, famously, you know the answer? He says, Yavne v'chachameh, allow me to open a school in Yavne. In other words, he knows Jerusalem will be destroyed. He knows the temple will be destroyed. He wants the ability to build a school. And he's given that. And so Vespasian goes back to Rome, becomes emperor. Titus becomes the general, later becomes emperor, who destroys the temple. But Yochanan ben Zakkai and his students established that school in Yavne. And today, you can go to Rome and you can see the triumphal arch that Titus built when he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, with a picture of the menorah, the golden menorah from the Beis Hamikdash being brought back on the backs of Roman soldiers, carved into this ark. You can see it. It's sight to behold. Okay, this is the triumphal arch that Titus made on his way back to Rome after conquering Jerusalem, with displaying all of the treasures that he stole from the Beis Hamikdash. And you can go there, and because Yochanan ben Zakkai built a school, we're there as Jews. We can study Torah, live the same way as our ancestors when the Roman Forum has crumbled, and it's just an archaeological site. It's year 70. Jewish community recovers from the effects of the war. It's actually another war in the year 135 or so. Bar Kokhba leads a revolt. This is the time of Rabbi Akiva.
135?
I think so. I didn't look that up, but I think that's it. And so Rabbi Akiva was involved. Rabbi Akiva was a big supporter of Bar Kokhba. He thought he was so significant, significant person. That revolt is crushed. A time of great persecution. And then, but yet it's still some time later, really like a generation or so later, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, around year 200, right? So it's a chunk of time later, feels that there's a risk that the Torah will be forgotten unless we commit the oral Torah to writing. Okay, and that produces the Mishnah. The Mishnah is divided into 6 sections. Each section is divided into tractates, or in Hebrew, masechtot. Each masechet, each tractate is divided into chapters. Each chapter is divided into mishnayot, into a mishnah, which is a small perikop, a little section, a little piece of oral Torah, a law, a rule, a detail of a law, a rule, for easy learning, memorization, etc. Okay? So it's a great act of editing that he did. Took all this old material from centuries and centuries and edited and clarified it, and he edits the Mishnah. And the Mishnah then becomes a launching part for subsequent Torah scholarship. I think. What we do in 10 minutes? Let's look at the Mishnah, and then we'll continue. Okay, so let me get you the Mishnah. Let's look. Okay, there you are. We'll do this again next time. One more time, just to show you. Here's an English Mishnah. If you have a smartphone, you can also go. This is all online. All these sources. I don't know if you know you have the Safari app. You can do this. You can take a look. But we'll do that next time. I don't want to distract. Okay, so here's okay. On Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of the festivals, 4 people read from the Torah, 4 aliyot. Okay, you don't decrease, you don't add. Not 3, not 5, just 4. Okay, and there's no haftarah reading from the prophets on Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed. Okay, and we want to begin, and here's a general rule: whatever has in it musaf and is not a festival, 4 read. So what's musaf? A day when we say musaf, it's not Yom Tov. That would be Rosh Chodesh. That's 4 aliyot. On a festival, 5. On Yom Kippur, 6. On Shabbat, 7. Okay? Basic rules about this. This is we do this today. Okay? Here it is in the Mishnah. This is the second Megillah, chapter 4, Mishnah 2. There it is. Okay? What's not? I'm going to sort of flip here. Okay? Let's see. There are 4 different New Years. And the first of the month of Nisan is the New Year for kings and for festivals, and the first of the month of Elul is the New Year for the animal tithes. First of Tishrei, some say. First of Tishrei, that's the New Year for years, counting years, and for the sabbatical year, and for the Jubilee years, for plantings, for vegetables. The first of the month of Shvat, that's the New Year for the trees. According to Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel say, and the 15th of the month of Shvat, that's the New Year for the trees. Okay, all these different mitzvot, you need to know when the calendar is. You have your fiscal year, you have your academic year, you have your calendar year. Okay? So do they. Okay? They're different New Years for different purposes. And these are they. Okay? We just celebrated one of these New Years, okay? That's a few weeks ago. So, this is the Mishnah, okay? Just very clear, in Hebrew, telling us the rules. What's not here doesn't tell us where the rule comes from. Doesn't tell us why. And every Mishnah, raises a lot of questions also about, the excluded. You tell us what to do in situation A, you tell us what to do in situation C. What about situation B? The excluded middle, okay? Or you tell us A, B, and C, but then you say that Rabbi Eliezer says something else. So is he right or is he wrong? And is Rabbi Eliezer disagreeing with the first opinion, or is he just adding something? Okay? Every Mishnah, you read a Mishnah, you come up with questions. And that's really true with any document, actually. I think any text can generate lots and lots of questions. No text can be sufficiently detailed that you don't have any questions about it ever. That's just the nature of text. The Mishnah, that's especially so because it's like short and quick and to the point and clear, which means you have lots of questions about it. And so what happened, from the time the Mishnah was edited in around the year 200 by Rabbi Nasi, for the next, let's say, 350 years, is that rabbis, scholars, discussed the Mishnah, argued about the Mishnah, asked those questions, provided answers. And those answers became what we call the Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud, the Athenian Talmud. Okay, the Talmud is a reconstructed account of several hundred years worth of questions and answers about the Mishnah. And so the Talmud follows the Mishnah. It has tractates, right? So tractates and chapters, and and the Talmud. We'll look at this next time. Well, we'll look at this time actually. I don't want to, because we have 5 minutes, so we use all our time.
How do you know which ones are valid? Is there one that you suggest on your reading list?
Which ones, meaning what?
How do you know which Mishnah is valid?
It's all valid. You just can't look at a Mishnah and know what to do. You look at a Mishnah, you get an early stage of Jewish law that has continued to develop over the centuries. So you can look at the Mishnah and say, oh, now I understand. If you read, it's a great thing to do actually, to read lots of Mishnah. You can do this. This is a great English edition. It's a great commentary. Each Mishnah has, here's the introductory background. You need to learn about this. And then Mishnah with a little commentary. And this is great. When you do big sections of Mishnah, you'll understand the oral Torah and the categories it contains and the mitzvot that it contains and some of the contours of what that observance looks like. We actually want out real good practical guidance. This is not going to be it's not a guidebook, it's not written for that. But that comes later, we'll get there. Okay? Just to show you how the Talmud is printed, see a large letter Mem here that stands for Mishnah, right? Not Nitin. So here's a few lines. Here's our Mishnah. Okay? And then this is the Talmud, the Gemara, the conversation about the Mishnah, which continues in this instance for several pages until you get to the next Mishnah, which is right here. In this Mishnah, a few lines, and then Gemara, again, that reconstructed record of several hundred years worth of conversations about the Mishnah takes us here. Okay? On the sides we have other commentaries from later. Okay? Which we'll talk about next time. But just the core of what's going on, right? You have a Mishnah, it generates questions, and we ask those questions. So if you learn the Mishnah and you learn the Gemara, then you're further along on your way to understanding how we do things, but you're not quite there yet. That's not what this was about. I think the pattern that we'll see, and we'll end with this, is in the world of Halakha and the oral Torah, you have this explosion of opinions and ideas and voices that then have to be kind of culled and distilled and narrowed and refined to get something much simpler. And so you have the oral Torah developing for hundreds of years and thousands of years, and the Rabbi Nasi says, let me clear this all out and make something nice and simple and clear, and that's the Mishnah, something nice and small. And then once you have that narrowing, you have this explosion of commentary and discussion, and then it was in the Middle Ages. Someone like the Rambam comes along and says, let me condense that and cut back all the extraneous material and give you something nice and clear and simple, and that in turn also then becomes a launching pad for a further round of interpretation. And that process has not ended. Okay? But we will continue the story next time. When is that? Do we have next time on the calendar? I think not. Okay. So let's open the calendar. November is a rough month because I am traveling. I'm not, November 4th, I'm not in town. November 11th is a board meeting. November 18th, I'm not in town. November 25th, we do Monday, November 25th, okay? Is 7 p.m. okay, in general?
I think I'm out of town 25th. You guys.
Okay, we will miss you and we will record, okay?
Okay.
7.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. hopefully this will be on YouTube channel in a day or two. You can show other friends. You can hear the parts you missed. Oh, this is an essay that one of my teachers wrote.
Thank you.
Sort of a backwards for the question, where does, I'm going to read you. Where does this all come from? Oh, it's right here. No, it's 2 pages, 2 pages.
Oh, sorry.
It's 2 pages. I don't know.
It's 2 or 3?
I think it's, meaning it's 2 sheets of paper? No, it's 3, it's 3 sheets of paper.
Yeah, all right.
Do you have a little one?
Yeah, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Sorry, my printer's not coding, I don't know why. No.
Thanks, then.
I was still trying to get down to my plain land and the customers are left off.
Well, thanks for coming tonight. I really,
It's okay.
yeah, that was right.
Paper driver, like, what is going on?
It's my class. That's great. That's terrific. That's wonderful.